Welcome back, chess friends. It's 1834, match number 2, game number 3. And McDonald has already won the first 2 matches, so he's winning 2 points to 0 in this second match. Let's see if he can increase his lead. But before we start, you may find yourself living in a shotgun shack. You may find yourself in another part of the world. You may find yourself dressed as a queen in some kind of chess pride event. And you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here? Your guess is as good as mine. So let's begin the game. E4. C5, and at this point everybody is shouting at McDonald, don't play F4. That never works out when you do that. So he plays F4, of course. We have knight to C6, knight to F3, and E6. And now we've seen this opening maybe 8 or 9 times already, and I think McDonald's won once, and there's been 1 draw, and the rest were all to Labordine. So I'm not holding out much hope for McDonald, but maybe he comes up with something this time. We have C3, D5 and E5, F6, knight to A3, so all the same moves, knight to H6, and knight back to C2, queen to B6, as Labordine is wont to do. We have D4, C captures on D4, C captures on D4, bishop to B4 with check. Previously, McDonald has dealt with this by just capturing the bishop, but he wants to try something different, so he immediately starts running away with his king. And Labordine just calmly develops his second bishop. So he's doing very well on his development here. McDonald not so much. He's still got 2 bishops and a queen to sort out, and he defers sorting them out and plays H4 here. Now we have F captures E5, F captures E5, and Labordine castles. So he's fully developed, and McDonald needs to work out what he's going to do. This rook is now X-raying the king. McDonald has this attack on the knight here, and Morphy comments, White here declines to exchange his queen's bishop for black's king's knight, and considering the winning position he very soon obtains, we must pronounce this line of play adopted instead to have been the correct one. So the line of play that he's talking about is king to G3, so fully endorsed by Morphy considering what comes next, so a little bit of foreshadowing. We have knight to F5 with check, so McDonald tucks his king in behind the pawn. Hopefully his king's going to be safe enough here, we'll soon see. We have bishop to E7, so Labordine immediately trying to pile up on this H-pawn. McDonald develops his light square bishop and attacks the knight, but Labordine doesn't mind too much. He brings his queen back to D8 to help attack this pawn. Now here, McDonald plays G4, and Morphy says, very well played. Okay, Morphy. We have knight captures on H4, and Morphy continues, an injudicious capture courted by his adversary and which ought to result in black's defeat. Knight to H6 would have been preferable, though still leaving the advantage with the first player. Okay, so he played captures on H4, and McDonald plays knight captures on H4. And now we have bishop captures on H4, and of course the king can't capture back because it's protected by the queen, but McDonald is able to push G5. Now here, bishop captures G5, and McDonald doesn't want to capture this bishop with the bishop because it's still protected by the queen. So instead he plays queen to H5, and Morphy says, White has now acquired a winning position. So awesome stuff. You can see the white square bishop here and the queen are piling up on the H-pawn. So Labordine is looking under pressure here. In fact, if you were to look under his comb over very carefully, you'll see him starting to sweat a little. And we have bishop back to H6, blocking the queen from the H square. But Morphy has a line here. He says, if instead H6, then rook to G1, best. The bishop captures the bishop, and then the rook sacrifices itself on G7. After the king captures, the queen delivers a check, backed up by the bishop, and the king has to go into the corner and then be checkmated. And Morphy continues, he says, Black may of course vary his 19th move, but it will be found that in no case can defeat be averted. By the 19th move, he meant this H6 move. So yeah, very nice for McDonald. So Labordine blocks with the bishop, and here McDonald captures the bishop with the bishop, but Morphy says, McDonald does not here select the best move. Rook to G1 was the coup just and must have speedily forced the game. Suppose rook to G1, king to H8, the rook sacrifices itself, the king captures back, then the queen captures the bishop, and it's going to be mate in 4 moves. Very nice. Okay, Morphy. That's not what happened. Instead, we had bishop captures bishop, and Labordonnais captures back with the pawn. But this lets McDonald play rook on a to g1, delivering a very nasty check down this open file. So he backs off his king to h8. You can still see him sweating here. He's just not having a fun time. And here we have queen captures h6 from McDonald. But Morphy says, white should have continued thus. Bishop captures on h7. And now queen to e7 is the best move for Labordonnais. And the bishop now comes back to d3. So there's a lot of power going to the corner here that Labordonnais won't be able to deal with. However, that's not what was played. As we said, the queen captured the pawn on h6. Queen to e7 and rook to g3 from McDonald. But Morphy says, again, bishop captures h7 was the correct play. Suppose this, then the queen is forced to capture the bishop because he doesn't want to allow the bishop to reveal the check because it'll be checkmate within 2 moves. So the queen captures and then it's a queen exchange and then rook to g3, and this wins at once. You can see if the king backs off here, it's immediate checkmate, and there's not really much that Labordonnais can do without losing a rook. So, for example, he can't come here to block because he'll get taken by the pawn. If he comes here, king backs off, and then the only move is to block, but then it's checkmate. And similarly, he could try coming here, but you know, you're just losing the rook straight away. So yeah, so completely winning. But of course, McDonald didn't do that. He played rook to g3 immediately here. And now Labordonnais plays rook to g8, and McDonald moves his queen to f6, which comes with check. And Morphy comments. He says, McDonald might even now have captured the rook's pawn with the bishop, though not with the same effect as on the preceding moves. The check given here was one of the worst moves at his disposal. It enables black at once to relieve himself from all embarrassment by an exchange of queens. And so, of course, Labordonnais exchanges the queens, and he's feeling a little bit more relaxed. He's feeling more comfortable now. McDonald, not so much. We have e captures f6, as we said. We have e5, and this comes with a revealed check. So the king moves back to g2, and now e4 are threatening the bishop. So the bishop backs off to e2, and now we have a rook exchange on g3, and Labordonnais brings his other rook across to the nice open file to deliver another check. So the king moves to h4. And now we have rook to g2, so nicely along the second file here, threatening everything. But McDonald tries a trap, a tricky trap. He goes rook to f1, backing up his pawn. Now here, Morphy says, white, the reader need hardly be told, would immediately queen his advanced pawn were his antagonist to capture the bishop. So the trap's this, captures, pawn moves up, and now Labordonnais wouldn't be able to stop McDonald getting a queen. So very nice trap. He's still got some tricks left, but of course Labordonnais spotted that one, and to get out of it he played rook to, king to g8. And now we have bishop to d1, defending the knight and getting the bishop out of the danger. And now bishop to e6 and b4, backed up by the knight. Labordonnais plays a6, and we have a4. And here Labordonnais checks the king from behind, which is rude. So the king has to move to g5. And now Labordonnais plays b5, and we have pawn captures, and McDonald plays bishop to h5, and Morphy says, this is mere desperation. The game is now irretrievably lost, which makes McDonald very sad indeed. The rook captures the knight, and the white rook goes to a1, and the black knight goes to d8. We have the rook coming up to the 7th rank, and now e3 from Labordonnais, so this pawn is now looking very dangerous, being passed. We have rook to g7 with check. The king moves to f8. He's not worried at all. And now king to h6, trying to get right up there into the corner. But Labordonnais has knight to f7 with check. So McDonald decides to capture it. The bishop captures back. And McDonald realizes he needs to do something about this super dangerous passed pawn. So he brings his rook down to attack. But Labordonnais just brings his rook across to deliver another check on the white king from behind, which, as we know, is very rude. We have king to g5, and Labordonnais pushes his pawn. So it's 1 square away from queening. So McDonald gets his rook into position, ready to capture it, but Labordonnais has bishop to h5, adding another defender. And it was here that McDonald took out a tissue and wiped away his tears and resigned the game with dignity. So well done, Labordonnais. You've won 1 game in the second match, but McDonald is still winning 2 games to 1. Why did he resign though? Well, there's nothing stopping this pawn from getting across. For example, if the king comes down here, the rook can come up, deliver a check, and the king can go up to here, but now we come across and have a rook exchange with check, and yeah, and now there's nothing stopping this pawn. That's one example. If the king backed off here, the rook's just coming across and picking up everything. If in this position the king just backs off, the rook can just come down here, and you're just going to have to lose this rook to stop the queen, for example, like this, and you've lost your rook. So completely losing for McDonald. So very sad, but he's still got some fight left in him. Remember, it's the best of 9 games, not including draws. So I'll see you again next time for game 4.